Greetings. In today's video, we're going to be discussing about the lead-based paint disclosure. Now, the lead-based paint disclosure is used in Florida for properties that were built prior to 1978, and it's basically to disclose that there may be lead-based paint within the property. And this document is absolutely required if the property is built in 1978 or further back. Anything older than a property built basically in 1979 and older, you don't have to worry about this. But if the property was built and constructed in 1978 or earlier, you need to make sure that you fill out this document. It's absolutely required and it's absolutely essential. So before we discuss this particular tutorial, I'd like to take a brief moment to explain our company. Nizz Realty Incorporated is a 100% commission real estate brokerage. This means that we pay realtors 100% of your real estate commission. We have $0 agent fees, and the only fee that we charge is a transaction fee upon closing. And we let you decide that transaction fee amount. We believe it's a better way to do business to keep you happy and let you choose what is a reasonable transaction fee than for you to go get a better deal somewhere else. For more information, feel free to read the description below this video. Visit our website at nizzrealty.com, or feel free to call or email us for a free confidential consultation. Without further delay, let's get into the video. So, lead-based paint disclosure. I see this particular document filled out incorrectly many times, and it's a very important document. There's a lot of liability involved if you do not fill it out correctly, and there's no reason to put yourself or your company under such liability, and to not fill it out correctly is actually a very simple document when you understand exactly the questions it's asking and how to fill it out. So I've already prepared this document so that we could show where to initial and make it a lot easier. As you see here, we just have the seller's name. Our seller today is John Doe. And we have the buyer. The buyer today is Billy Bob. And you just put their names there respectively, however many buyers or sellers there are. Then you write the full property address. And like I say in all the videos, make sure it's the full address. I see a lot of realtors, they like to leave out the city name or they don't put the zip code. It's completely unacceptable. The full property address, city, state, zip, full address, as you would write it like you're mailing something. The full address, nothing less, is acceptable. This is the only way it looks good. I know it sounds silly, but I have to re-emphasize on that because I see it happen so many times where people forget to fill out the full address. So, next part, the buyer's and seller's initials. Make sure they initial. So, we're going to grab John Doe, who's our seller. He's going to initial here. If there's another seller, you put all their initials there. And we're going to grab Billy Bob. We're going to put his initials here. Make sure their initials are here. It's unacceptable for it not to be here. All the buyer's and seller's initials. Let's move on. The next part here. Most of the time that I've dealt with these properties is usually the seller has no knowledge and no reports of lead-based paint. So the way you're going to fill it out usually is how it's shown in this video. If nobody has no knowledge of lead-based paint, has no reports, has no idea about lead-based paint within the property. They just know the property is built between 1978 and further back, and that's about it. No idea about lead-based paint. On the other hand, if the seller knows that there's lead-based paint in the property or has some type of reports or documentation covering lead-based paint, then you'd fill out one of these other bubbles respectively, such as instead of marking this where it says seller has no knowledge, you would mark the known here, that the seller does know there's lead-based paint. And then what you're going to need to do is have the seller initial right here where it says A. You're going to have them initial here, all the sellers, and you're going to have them initial here on part B, all the time, because they're initialing A whether they know about it or they don't know about it. In this particular example, the seller has no knowledge. That's usually how I've seen it. I've never ran into a situation where the seller knows about lead-based paint, but that doesn't mean that you can't run into that situation. You most certainly can run into a situation where you ask the seller, do you know anything about lead-based paint in this particular property? And they say, yes, I do, and I may or may not have reports about that. So you mark this accordingly and make sure all of the sellers initial here on part A and Part B. I see a lot of realtors, they skip the initials here. It's completely unacceptable. Make sure they initial both. So you'll mark this accordingly. If you have questions about this, contact me and I'll advise you on which you need to mark depending on the situation. And Part B, what they're initialing, in this particular example, once again, the seller has no reports or recordings. Now, if they do have reports, then you'd mark the other section here, and you'd have them provide the buyer with all available records and reports. And you could list the documents here of what they're providing. So that's if the seller has documentation about lead-based paint. Once again, for this particular example, we're going to say that there's no reports. And if you run into an example where nobody knows anything, nobody has any reports, then you're going to mark it just how you see it here. Seller has no knowledge, seller has no reports, and make sure every single seller initials here. I know it sounds a little bit redundant, I'm explaining this here, but I see a lot of mistakes happening here all the time, so I want to make sure that you understand exactly what to do when filling out this document. Look at this video and just copy here. If the seller has no knowledge, make sure you mark and have them initial. And if they do have knowledge, feel free to contact me to fill out these bubbles and fill it out correctly. For now, let's move on to the next section for the buyer initials. So here you're going to mark whether the buyer is going to initial here pretty much all the time. So let's go to the buyer signature. And you're going to have the buyer, all the buyers initial on Part C. You're going to have the initial on Part D. And you're going to have them also initial in Part E here. Basically that the buyers receive copies of all information listed above, including the copy of this. They're acknowledging receipt of this. Even if there's no reports, you want them to acknowledge receipt of this particular page here. So you have them initial on every single line here, the buyer. You also want to provide them with the Protect Your Family pamphlet. This is also, you could get a copy of this by contacting me. I could send you a copy of this. It's just a little booklet basically discussing about lead-based paint and, how it affects the properties and so forth and why there's a disclosure about it. You want to send them a copy of this pamphlet. You could send it, as a PDF and email to make it easy, or you can print it out for them, whichever you prefer. And then you want to have them initial this part down here. Whatever you're going to click here, this is completely up to you. Most of the time I usually click they've received the 10-day opportunity to do whatever the buyer wants to do. If they want to hire professionals to, do an inspection to see if there's lead-based paint and so forth, then that's completely up to them. They have 10 days to do that. Or if you want to have them click this where they waive the opportunity to conduct a risk assessment, you can have them do that too. Usually I like to give them at least 10 days if the property is built before 1978 or in 1978, just to give them that 10-day window so that at least they had that opportunity if they want to do anything. So once again, make sure the seller's initial up here and all of the buyer's initial here. Everyone needs to initial all of these sections. The sellers are in A and B, the buyers are in C, D, and E. And make sure you check mark these boxes accordingly of what you're doing. It's unacceptable to not check boxes, and it's completely unacceptable to not have everyone initial here. It's very important. Once again, I know it sounds a little redundant, but I see the mistake so many times. The buyers won't initial on Part D or Part E, and maybe the seller will only initial in A. It's unacceptable. They need to initial every single section here. Do not put yourself under this type of liability. Do not fill the documents out incorrectly. It's completely unacceptable, and it's very simple to do. Now let's get to the last parts here of this particular document. The licensee's acknowledgement. You as the real estate associate, you're going to have to sign this and initial it also. A lot of times I see realtors forget to initial here. So let's just say this is our realtor here is working on this particular transaction. Make sure you initial here, that you've done your due diligence and have made everyone aware and so forth. So you as the real estate agent need to initial here. And then you as the real estate agent, whether you're the selling licensee working with the buyer or you're the listing licensee working with the seller, both real estate agents, if there is both on each party, needs to sign this document. So you can have both also initial up here. They should initial up here, both both realtors, whether it's the buyer's realtor or the seller's realtor, both of you should initial here, and then make sure you sign it. The listing licensee needs to sign it, and make sure you date it. Another silly thing, I see a lot of people, they don't date it. I don't know why they choose to sign it and they don't date it for some reason. Make sure you date it. It's completely unacceptable to not write a couple of numbers and date your signature. So make sure you date it. I know it sounds a little silly, but I see it all the time. People don't like to write the date for some reason. Make sure you write the date. And then you just have the sellers signed also, and the buyers. So you'll take the seller's signature, you'll put it here, make sure they date it once again. Take the buyer's signature, however many sellers and buyers there are, you put it here, you make sure they date it. And this is how you fill out this document. Now, before we end this video, I want to show you that if you're doing a residential lease for a condo or an apartment, this particular lead-based paint disclosure is in that particular lease. However, you need to make sure that you mark that this is being accompanied with it. So let's take a look real quick. I have this prepared already. This is the residential lease for an apartment or multi-family, other than a duplex like a condominium, cooperative. So let's scroll down to the lead-based paint section. This is an actual lease, for the like I said, a condo and so forth. Here we go, lead-based paint. This is the exact same thing we were just filling out, just it's incorporated into this contract. You need to check this up here if you're filling this out. A lot of realtors, they don't see this part here where it says lead-based paint in this particular paragraph, and they don't check mark this, and they fill it out here, and they may fill this out incorrectly or correctly, but make sure you check mark this here, that you're filling this out, that the property was built, let's say whatever it was built in 1978 or 1975, 1950. Check mark this. It's unacceptable to not simply press this button and check mark it and fill it out. I know it sounds silly once again, but a lot of times I see it gets forgotten. You need to check mark this, and you need to fill this document out perfectly. And it's very simple to fill out, like we have here. Make sure everyone signs it and dates it, including the listing licensee and the selling licensee, and make sure all the real estate agents initial here, and make sure you fill out these boxes with accordance of what you're doing. And if there's no knowledge of lead-based paint, just look at this video, look at this document I have here, and fill it out like this with these boxes. It's a very simple document, but I see it done incorrectly many times, and that's why we're making this video today, to make sure you don't make those mistakes and you do this correctly. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.